never thought silence could be louder than shouting. But that night, when the TV went black and nobody defended me, the quiet hit harder than any insult ever could. And that's when I realized something dangerous. I wasn't just being disrespected, I was being erased inside my own house. What my son-in-law didn't know was this. I had already signed the paper that would end his entire sense of control. He just didn't know it yet. Let me take you back to how it really started. It was one of those evenings that only comes after you've lived long enough to earn them. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones. I was sitting in my green velvet armchair in the family room, the one I bought with my very first Social Security check after my husband passed away 15 years ago. That chair wasn't just furniture. It was proof that I survived something and kept going. The news murmured softly on the television, my coffee was cooling on the side table, and the kitchen still smelled like peach cobbler. For the first time all day, nobody needed anything from me. That's when the front door slammed. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. Derek always entered a room like he was announcing his ownership of oxygen. Heavy steps. No greeting. No pause. Just presence. Behind him, my daughter Lena shuffled in with shopping bags hanging off her arms. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes glued to the floor like she was apologizing just for existing. Derek walked straight in front of the TV and blocked my view. He stood there for a second, watching me, like I was something he'd stepped in and hadn't scraped off yet. Then he reached down, grabbed the remote, and shut the television off. The click sounded sharp. Final. "Go to your room, old woman," he said. "I've got the game on. This living room is mine now." Mine. That word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. I didn't answer right away. I just slowly turned my head toward Lena. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her hands clenched around the grocery bag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I waited. Not for an argument. Not for a speech. Just for one sentence. "Don't talk to my mother like that." That's all it would have taken. Instead, she dropped her eyes and adjusted one of the bags, like something inside had shifted. That was the moment. Something inside me went cold. Not angry, not sad, clear. You see, I worked 35 years at the county recorder's office. Deeds, titles, ownership. And one thing that job teaches you fast is this. Words don't mean a damn thing. Paper does. And I had paper. Derek had already sprawled across my couch by the time I stood up. He popped open a soda, kicked his shoes off, and turned the volume up like I was already gone. In his world, I wasn't a person anymore. I was furniture. Old. Silent. Replaceable. I didn't say a word. I walked past him, down the hall, and into my bedroom. Not to cry. Not to hide. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled out a worn leather pouch I kept for bank business. Inside was a set of keys and a blue folder held together with a faded elastic band. My fingers slid over the papers like old friends. The deed. Owner. Celeste M. Everson. Sole owner. Always had been. In the mirror, I caught my reflection. Short gray hair, glasses on a chain, linen slacks, navy blouse. I looked like the kind of grandma people underestimate, and for a long time I let them. I slipped the folder back where it belonged, grabbed my keys, and walked out. Derek glanced over his shoulder and smirked. "Taking a stroll? Don't get lost, Celeste. At your age, that happens.
I didn't answer. I unlocked the front door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me, quietly, firmly, like putting a period at the end of a sentence. The air was cool and clean. I wasn't shaken. I wasn't confused. I felt awake. I locked the gate from the outside, walked to the curb, and hailed the first cab that slowed down. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The Grand Hyatt downtown," I said. As the city lights slid past the window, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years, but trusted with my life. Andrew V. Sterling, attorney at law. He answered on the second ring. "Celeste, it's almost 9. Everything okay?" "No," I said calmly, "but it's about to be." There was a pause. He knew that tone. "I need your help. I want to evict 2 people from my house." Another pause. Longer this time. "Your daughter and son-in-law?" "Yes." He didn't ask why. He asked what they did. He told me to go to my room, called me an old woman, said the living room was his. My daughter stayed silent. Andrew exhaled slowly. "You want the law, not sympathy."
Exactly. The house is yours.
"Sole owner, no lease. They've lived there 4 years rent-free."
All right, he said. We'll issue a notice to quit. 30 days. Personal service. I'll send Roman first thing in the morning. Good, I said. And Andrew? Yes? Add a warning. Back rent. Penalties. And make sure they understand this is real. He chuckled once, low and impressed. You're dangerous when you're calm. I'm just done, I said. The hotel lobby smelled like lavender and money. The doorman opened my door like I mattered. I checked in with nothing but my purse and my dignity and rode the elevator up alone. In the room, I turned the TV on, set the volume exactly how I liked it, ordered soup and a glass of wine, ate slowly, slept deeply. The next morning, I signed every document with a steady hand. Each signature felt like reclaiming something I'd handed away piece by piece over 4 years. By 9:30 a.m., Roman was at my house. And that's when my phone started vibrating. Lena's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Then I answered. "Mama," she cried, "there's a man here with papers. Derek is screaming. What's happening? Where are you?" "Read the notice," I said. "Tell your husband the old woman is unavailable for screaming today." And I hung up. Because this was only the beginning. The silence after I ended that call was the cleanest sound I had heard in years. No shouting, no footsteps, no tension crawling up my spine. Just stillness. I sat in the reception area of Andrew Sterling's office, hands folded in my lap, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the polite ticking of a clock that actually respected time. For decades, I had been the woman running between rooms, smoothing things over, lowering my voice, adjusting myself to fit other people's moods. That morning, I wasn't moving at all. I was waiting. And waiting felt powerful. Andrew stepped out of his office and nodded once, the way professionals do when the machine has been set in motion and all that's left is gravity. "Roman has served the notice," he said. "Signature acknowledged. Inventory attached. No scene worth mentioning, though there was plenty of noise." I smiled faintly. Noise had never scared me. It was silence that told the truth. I stayed seated. Panic always travels faster than reason, and I knew it would find me soon enough. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against my knee like it couldn't stand being ignored. Lena's name lit up the screen, followed by a text message that arrived before I could even swipe it away. Mama, please come home. Derek is furious. This is humiliating. People are watching. I turned the phone face down. Today, my silence was doing the talking. I stared at the wall across from me, letting memories line up in my mind like receipts laid out on a table. 4 years of shrinking myself, eating whatever was left, turning the TV volume down until I needed subtitles, paying bills without comments, without gratitude, without acknowledgement. I had told myself it was temporary, that families need time, that things would settle. What I had really been doing was training them to live without respect. Andrew returned with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one without asking how I took it. He remembered. You all right? He asked. I nodded. Better than all right. I just realized I don't need to explain myself anymore. He smiled, the kind of smile you give someone who finally stopped negotiating with gravity. There was one more thing I needed to do before the day got away from me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with stiff covers and blank pages that hadn't been contaminated by excuses yet. On the first clean page, I wrote 3 words. Turn off taps. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Utilities, I said calmly. Everything in my name. Internet, cable, sports package, the landline, and the supplementary credit card my daughter uses. Not canceled. Suspended. I want to see what happens when the noise runs out of power. Andrew didn't argue. He simply nodded and slid his chair closer to his desk. I'll make the calls, or you want to do it yourself? I shook my head. I'll do it. I want them to hear my voice. One by one, I made the calls. Each operator polite. Each confirmation immediate. Within 2 hours, service would be suspended. The card would be frozen. Alerts would come only to my phone. When I ended the last call, something loosened in my chest. It wasn't cruelty, it was alignment. My stomach growled then, reminding me that adrenaline eventually demands payment. I stood up, smoothed my blouse, and thanked Andrew. Before leaving, I paused. Is there a good clothing store nearby? He blinked. Clothing? I need a uniform, I said. Something that matches my spine. He laughed quietly and pointed me toward the mall, 2 blocks away. Walking there felt strange at first, like learning how to stand differently. I caught my reflection in a shop window and barely recognized the woman walking past. She looked taller, not because she'd changed, but because she'd stopped folding herself. Inside the store, a young woman named Jenna greeted me without pity or condescension. I told her exactly what I wanted. Calm, professional. Something that says no without raising its voice. She nodded and brought me trousers, a crisp blouse, and a blazer that felt like armor when I slipped it on. I changed right there and handed my old clothes back. Donate them, I said. They've done their job. By the time I sat down at a quiet restaurant upstairs, my phone had started vibrating again. Text messages stacked on top of each other like overdue bills. The internet is out. The card declined. Call me now. I turned the phone face down and ordered risotto and a glass of wine. I ate slowly, tasting every bite. Halfway through, a notification buzzed from my bank. Transaction declined. $85. Butcher shop. Prime ribeye. I smiled. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because truth had finally arrived at the register. My phone rang. Derek's number. I answered this one. It's not a glitch, I said before he could speak. The card is frozen. The services are suspended. You'll need to pay for your own lifestyle now, he shouted. Threatened. Accused. I waited until he ran out of breath. Then I said one sentence. The living room isn't yours if you can't afford the lights. And I hung up. Back at the hotel, I slept for an hour. Real sleep. The kind you don't wake up from already tired. When I woke, the front desk called. Your daughter is in the lobby. She says it's urgent. I checked the time. Late afternoon. Perfect. I adjusted my blazer, took a breath, and went down. Lena looked smaller than I remembered. Wrinkled blouse, messy hair, eyes red from crying.
She rushed toward me, words spilling over each other, excuses mixed with fear. I held up my hand. Sit down, I said. We're going to talk like adults. She sat. I told her the rules. 30 days. No utilities, no cards, no drama. This isn't punishment, it's order. She called it humiliation. I called it consequences. When she tried to soften me with memories, I asked one question. Where's the money? 4 years of free living. Where did it go? She didn't answer. Her silence told me everything. Tomorrow, I said, 10 o'clock. Andrew Sterling's office. You and your husband will be there. We're done pretending. She left without hugging me. That was fine. Growth doesn't hug on command. That night, I turned off the location sharing on my phone. I laid my keys on the nightstand and listened to the hotel hum. Somewhere across town, a man was shouting into darkness, and for the first time, it had nothing to do with me. Tomorrow would be louder. Tomorrow would be honest. And tomorrow I would stop being the quiet one.
The next morning felt different before my feet even touched the floor. No alarm, no rush, just light slipping through the hotel curtains like it had nowhere else to be. I lay there for a moment, listening to my own breathing, steady and unbothered. That's when it hit me. For the first time in years, nobody was waiting for me to fix their mess before breakfast. I showered, dressed in the same calm uniform, and went downstairs for coffee like a woman with an appointment she wasn't afraid of. At Andrew Sterling's office, the conference room was already prepared. The air was cool, the table polished, the folders stacked neatly like they'd been practicing restraint for years. I asked for the seat at the head of the table. Not dramatically, just matter of fact. Andrew took his place to my right, pen aligned with the edge of his notepad. Across from us, 2 empty chairs waited. The door opened. Derek walked in first, already angry, already loud, like volume could substitute for authority. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, eyes dark from a night spent fighting reality. Lena followed behind him, clutching her purse like it might float away if she let go. She didn't look at me. She sat slowly, shoulders curved inward, like she was bracing for impact. I didn't speak until everyone was seated. This meeting is about facts, I said, not feelings. Andrew nodded and slid the notice across the table. Derek slapped his hand down before reading it. We've lived there for 4 years. That counts for something. We have rights. I looked at him over my glasses and waited until his own words made him uncomfortable. Then I spoke. Rights come from ownership or agreements. You have neither. You had permission. That permission has ended. He scoffed. You can't just kick us out. There's something called adverse possession. I almost smiled. Almost. I spent 35 years working with property law, I said. Adverse possession requires abandonment, non-payment, and silence. I lived there. I paid everything, and I'm speaking now. Very clearly, Andrew backed me up with the calm voice of someone who never needed to shout to win. The notice is valid. Service was proper. 30 days. Derek turned to Lena like she was supposed to rescue him. Tell her this is insane. Tell her she's destroying our family. Lena opened her mouth, closed it, and stared at the table. That silence again. The same one that had broken something in me days earlier. Only now it worked in my favor. I reached into my folder and placed another stack of papers on the table. Bank statements, transfer records, loan notices. Derek stiffened. What's that supposed to be? Receipts, I said. 4 years of support, utilities, groceries, car payments, and the savings you claimed you were building. I slid one document toward Lena. Read the balance. Her hand shook as she scanned the page. 0. Then below it, a negative number. She swallowed hard. It was investments, Derek snapped. The market dipped. I was going to fix it. You used my money to gamble, I said calmly, and then you sat on my couch and told me to go to my room. The room went quiet. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause. Andrew cleared his throat. There's more. He laid out the final paper. Corporate notice. Derek's job had flagged his behavior. Emails, complaints, pressure tactics.
This meeting, it turned out, wasn't the only fire he'd started. I stood up. Not to threaten, just to end it. 30 days, I repeated. You will find your own housing. You will pay your own bills. If there are scenes, threats, or damage, law enforcement will be involved. I turned to Lena. This part is your choice. You can keep sinking with him, or you can swim. But you will not do it in my house. Her eyes filled. Not with tears of anger, but with recognition. Derek looked smaller suddenly, like a man who had mistaken noise for power and just lost the microphone. As I walked out, I felt lighter. Not victorious, just aligned. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. Lena's name. I didn't answer right away. I took 3 breaths. Then I picked up. Mama, she whispered. I didn't get in his car. Good, I said. That's how it starts. And as the elevator doors closed, I knew something irreversible had happened. The house would be mine again. But more importantly, so would my voice.
The days after that meeting moved slower, but they carried more weight. When noise finally stops, reality doesn't rush in all at once. It seeps. I went back to the hotel that afternoon, set my keys on the nightstand, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning the TV on. I wasn't tired. I wasn't shaken. I was adjusting to the absence of chaos. That absence felt strange at first, like stepping off a boat and still feeling the water move under your feet. My phone stayed quiet longer than I expected. No explosions. No midnight apologies. Just one short message from Andrew confirming that all legal correspondence would now go through his office. That was my shield. Anyone who wanted access to me would have to go through paper and patience. Both things Derek hated. Late that evening, Lena texted, "I'm staying with a friend tonight." I didn't reply right away. Then I sent one sentence. "Take care of yourself." That was all. No instructions. No rescue. Adults don't need saving. They need space to decide. The next morning, I woke early and went for a walk. Not for exercise, just movement. I walked past cafes opening their doors, past people complaining about small things, past a world that didn't know my house had been a battlefield. That's when I realized how much of my life I'd spent carrying stress that wasn't visible to anyone else. It didn't make me special, it just made me tired. By midday, the first cracks started showing on their side. Andrew forwarded me an email from Derek's corporate legal department. He had been reprimanded for unprofessional conduct and misuse of company time. Pressure makes people sloppy. Sloppy people leave trails. I closed the email without satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. That afternoon, I went to the bank in person. I wanted eye contact. I wanted confirmation. I sat across from a woman younger than my daughter and calmly requested that all accounts be separated, beneficiaries updated, and any remaining shared access revoked. She typed, nodded, and said, "Done," like it was nothing. For me, it was everything. I walked out lighter, like I'd just put down a bag I'd been carrying so long I forgot it wasn't part of my body. In the evening, the hotel phone rang. The front desk again. "Your daughter is here. She's asking if you can talk." I checked the time. Not too late. Not too emotional. Acceptable. I went down. Lena looked exhausted. Not dramatic. Just worn. She sat across from me in the lobby like someone waiting for a verdict. "Mama," she said softly, "he's blaming you for everything." I nodded. Of course he is. People who never take responsibility always outsource it. She swallowed. "He says if I leave him, I'll regret it." I leaned forward. Regret is easier to survive than erasure. She stared at me like that sentence had unlocked something she hadn't named yet. We didn't argue. We didn't negotiate. I told her what would happen next. 30 days would pass quickly. She needed a plan that didn't include my square footage. She needed her own account, her own lease, her own silence. I told her she could come to my house later as a guest, not as a dependent. She nodded slowly. That word landed. Guest. It didn't hurt. It clarified. When she left, she hugged me. Brief. Careful. Adult. I stayed seated for a moment after she walked out, letting that small shift settle. This wasn't a happy ending. It was a correct one. That night, I slept deeply again, the kind of sleep that doesn't replay conversations. The next morning, Andrew called. Derek had requested mediation. I declined. I don't mediate boundaries, I said. I enforce them. Andrew laughed softly. He knew. As the days passed, updates came in fragments. Derek was scrambling for housing, complaining loudly, blaming everyone. Lena was quieter, working more hours, looking at small apartments. The contrast told me everything I needed to know. On the 10th day, I drove by my house for the first time. I didn't stop. I just passed it slowly, like visiting a place that used to belong to you in a dream. The curtains were closed, the yard unkempt. The silence inside was different now. Not mine yet, but close. At a red light, my phone buzzed. Lena, I answered. Mama, she said. I didn't get in his car again. I smiled. Good. That's still how it continues. When the light turned green, I drove forward, knowing something steady was building. Not drama, not triumph. Structure. And structure, I had learned, was freedom wearing sensible shoes.
By the second week, the noise had turned desperate. Desperation has a rhythm to it. It comes in bursts, then silence, then louder bursts, like someone shaking a locked door and hoping it will eventually give in. I could feel it without hearing it. Every unanswered call, every ignored message tightened the spiral on the other end. And for the first time, that spiral wasn't pulling me in. I stayed at the hotel a few more days, not because I was afraid to go home, but because I wanted distance to do its work. Space reveals patterns you miss when you're too close. Each morning I dressed calmly, ate slowly, and walked through the city like a woman with nowhere she needed to apologize for being. That alone felt revolutionary. Andrew kept me updated without drama. Derek had asked for an extension. Denied. He threatened to contest the eviction. Andrew welcomed the paperwork. Threats, it turned out, were the last currency of a man who'd spent everything else. The law doesn't respond to volume. It responds to ink. Lena called one evening, her voice steadier than before. I found a studio, she said. It's small, older building. I have to bring my own microwave. I smiled into the phone. That's called independence. She hesitated. He says you're turning me against him. I answered without hesitation. I'm turning you toward yourself. There was a pause. Then she laughed softly. A real laugh. The kind that sounds like surprise. A few days later, Andrew forwarded me something else. Photos. Derek had been removing fixtures from the house. Light mounts. Shelving. Things he claimed he'd paid for. He hadn't. I authorized documentation and warned of penalties for damage. Suddenly, the removal stopped. Boundaries tend to have that effect. On day 15, I returned home briefly to collect winter clothes. I didn't go inside. Roman met me at the gate with a clipboard, calm and professional. The house looked tired, like it had been yelling for too long. Derek wasn't there. Lena stood in the doorway, eyes red but focused. She handed me a box without speaking. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The box was heavy with sweaters and finality. That night, alone again, I felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for them, but for myself. For the years I'd spent convincing myself this was normal. That endurance was love. That silence was peace. I let the grief sit beside me without rushing it out. It deserved that much. The next morning, I made a list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what was returning. My mornings. My quiet. My money. My voice. I called a painter, scheduled a refresh, peach for the family room, warm, mine. I ordered cleaning supplies,
new curtains, simple things that signal a reset. Andrew called again. Lena had officially separated her finances. Derek was furious. Of course he was. Fury is what happens when entitlement meets a closed door. He asked for one last conversation. I declined again. Closure is a luxury for people who respected you while they had access. That evening, Lena came by the hotel. She knocked, waited, asked if she could come in. The difference mattered. We sat by the window and watched the city dim. I told her I'd help her think, not pay. Support, not rescue. She nodded. I need to learn how to stand, she said. Yes, I replied. That's the whole point. When she left, I felt something settle into place. Not happiness, readiness. The house would be empty soon. And when I walked back through that door, it wouldn't be to negotiate. It would be to reclaim. The countdown had begun, and this time I wasn't waiting for permission.
The final 2 weeks moved faster than I expected. Time does that when decisions are already made. There were no more arguments, no dramatic messages, no late night pleas, just logistics, boxes, deadlines. The quiet kind of activity that happens when people realize the door really is closing. Andrew confirmed that the move-out date was set and documented. Roman would be there in the morning to supervise the handover. I wouldn't be present. I didn't need to watch the end to know it had arrived. On the morning of the last day, I woke without an alarm. The light coming through the hotel window was soft and even like a blank page waiting for a signature. I dressed simply, had breakfast, and drove out of the city. Not to avoid anything, but to mark the day differently. While a moving truck pulled up to my gate, I was sitting in a quiet spa. Steam rising, letting tension I hadn't noticed finally loosen its grip. Roman called just once. They're loading now. Some noise, nothing serious. He'll sign. I thanked him and put my phone away. Control doesn't require supervision, it requires clarity. When you've said no properly, the rest is paperwork. By midday, another short call. Keys handed over. Inventory complete. Minor damage noted. Locks intact. They're gone. That was it. No ceremony. No applause. Just fact. I sat there a moment longer, then stood, rinsed my hands, and walked back out into the sun like someone leaving a doctor's appointment with a clean bill of health. I stopped at a hardware store on the way back. Gloves, mop, floor cleaner, new light bulbs, practical things, symbols of beginning disguised as chores. I also called the painter. Tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. Family room and hallway. Peach. He confirmed and hung up. People who work with their hands tend to understand timing better than anyone. When I finally drove to the house, I didn't rush. I parked, took the keys from my purse, and stood at the gate for a second longer than necessary. The metal felt familiar in my palm. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The house was empty. Not quiet. Empty. Furniture shadows marked the floor where their life had been. Screw holes scarred the walls. The air was stale, heavy with leftover noise. I opened every window at once. A draft rushed through, lifting the curtains, carrying something out that had overstayed its welcome. I stood in the middle of the family room and breathed. Then I got to work. I cleaned slowly, methodically, not angrily. Every wipe, every sweep, every bucket of warm water felt like reclaiming inches of myself. I adjusted the framed riverfront print, lowering it to a height that felt right to me. I scrubbed the rug until the water ran clear. I threw out magazines no one had read in years. By evening, the house smelled clean and honest. I made tea. Sat in my green velvet armchair. The same one. The room felt different now. Not tense, not watchful, just open. I turned on the TV and raised the volume exactly 1 notch higher than I used to. Nobody reached for the remote. Nobody flinched. There was a knock at the door. I knew who it was. Lena stood there, hands folded, eyes cautious. She didn't step in until I said, "Come in." She looked around slowly. "It's warm," she said. "Peach suits the room." I nodded. A house should feel warm. Everything else is optional. We sat, drank tea. She told me about her studio.
Low ceiling, loud neighbor, but hers. She'd filed for divorce. The words came out steady, like she'd practiced them privately until they stopped hurting so much. I listened. I didn't rescue. I didn't instruct. I witnessed. Before she left, she asked carefully if she could come by sometimes, as a guest. No keys, no staying over, just conversation. I smiled. That's exactly how it works now. After she left, I walked through the house again, not inspecting, appreciating. In my notebook, I wrote one line, Wednesday, 4 p.m. tea, boundaries, bring papers. Then I closed it. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in years without bracing for footsteps. The house breathed around me, steady and calm. I was home again. And this time, nothing in it was rented out.
The first morning back in the house felt almost ceremonial. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet respect you give something that's finally been put back where it belongs. I woke without tension in my shoulders, without that half second of listening for footsteps in the hallway. The house was still. Not empty anymore, just settled. I made coffee and drank it at the kitchen table, not standing, not rushing, not waiting for someone to interrupt me with a demand disguised as a question. That afternoon, the painter arrived right on time. He worked efficiently, no small talk, just steady brushstrokes covering old marks and memories. Peach spread across the walls like forgiveness without forgetfulness. I watched for a moment, then left him to it. Some transformations don't need an audience. While the paint dried, I ran errands. Small, ordinary things that suddenly felt symbolic. New light fixtures. A softer rug. Curtains that let light in without asking permission. At the checkout counter, I paid with my own card, my own name printed cleanly on the receipt. That detail mattered more than I expected. By evening, the family room looked like a different life. Warm walls. Clean lines. The green velvet armchair placed exactly where I wanted it, not angled to accommodate anyone else's view. I sat down, remote in hand, and smiled at how unimportant it suddenly felt. Power was no longer in the object. It was in the absence of fear. The next day, Wednesday, I set the kettle on early. 4 p.m. sharp. I laid out pens, blank paper, and my folder of documents on the table. Not as a threat, as an offering. Boundaries are easier to accept when they're explained calmly. The doorbell rang on time. Zoe arrived first, then Olga, and finally Betty, who looked like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. They sat around my table, hands wrapped around mugs, eyes heavy with things they hadn't said out loud yet. Betty spoke first. My son wants me to sign the house over to him. Says it's an investment. I'm afraid to say no. I nodded slowly. Fear has a way of dressing itself up as love. We talked plainly, about wills instead of gifts, about keeping ownership while alive, about not signing anything when your heart is racing. I gave them exact phrases to use, simple sentences, no apologies attached. Betty practiced saying them out loud until her voice stopped shaking. By the end of the hour, her back was straighter. She asked for another cup of tea instead of wiping her eyes. When they left, the house felt fuller, not drained, like it had been used for something honest. I washed the cups, wiped the table, and opened the windows. The garden rustled softly, like it approved. That evening, Lena stopped by. She knocked, waited. I let her in. She told me about work, about budgeting, about how strange it felt to make decisions without checking in with someone else first. I told her that feeling was called adulthood. She laughed. Then she got quiet. You know, she said, if you hadn't turned off the utilities that day, I never would have heard myself think. I nodded. Silence can be generous when it's chosen. After she left, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I knew who it was. I blocked it without listening to the voicemail. Some conversations expire. I walked through the house once more before bed. Everything was where I'd put it. Nothing felt temporary. On the nightstand, my keys rested alone. No extra sets, no explanations attached. I lay down and listened to the quiet. Not the fragile kind that waits to be broken,
but the steady kind that belongs to someone who finally stopped negotiating with disrespect. Tomorrow, life would continue. Ordinary, predictable, mine.
Life didn't suddenly turn magical after that. It turned steady. And steady, I learned, is far more valuable than excitement. The days fell into a rhythm that belonged to me. Morning coffee at the table, afternoon walks, evenings with the TV on exactly as loud as I liked it. No one reached for the remote. No one sighed loudly to remind me I was taking up space. The house had stopped bracing itself. Lena came by once or twice a week, always calling first, always arriving like a guest, not an obligation. She talked about work, about learning how to budget, about how quiet her studio felt at night. Sometimes she admitted the quiet scared her. I told her that fear fades when you stop confusing noise with love. She listened more than she spoke now. That was new. One afternoon, Andrew stopped by with final paperwork. Everything was closed, sealed, archived, no loose ends. We sat in the family room, peach walls glowing softly in the afternoon light. "You handled this cleanly," he said. "Most people wait until resentment rots everything. You stopped early." I smiled. I didn't stop early. I stopped late. I just finally stopped. After he left, I sat alone and thought about how long I'd been teaching people what I would tolerate. I thought generosity meant endless access. I thought patience meant silence. I understood now that I'd been confusing kindness with permission. And permission, once given without limits, turns into expectation. That realization changed how I moved through the world. I started saying no without explaining myself. I declined invitations I didn't want. I ended conversations when they crossed into disrespect. Each time, nothing terrible happened. The world didn't collapse. People adjusted, or they didn't. Either way, I slept fine. One evening, the phone rang, a familiar number this time. I let it ring twice before answering. It was Derek's mother. She spoke carefully, like someone approaching a sleeping animal. I won't repeat what she said. Only this. She wanted me to smooth things over, to convince Lena to come back, to be the bigger person. I listened quietly. Then I said one sentence. "I am not responsible for the consequences of a grown man's behavior." And I hung up. That night, Lena called later than usual. "He showed up at my place," she said, yelling. I didn't open the door. I called the police. There was fear in her voice, but also pride. I told her she did the right thing. She believed me. The following week, the house hosted another Wednesday tea. More women came. Stories poured out. Pressure. Guilt. Sons and daughters who mistook access for ownership. We talked about documents, passwords, separate accounts, and the power of a simple no. No shouting, no drama, just clarity. When they left, the house felt like it had purpose again. One afternoon, while rearranging a shelf, I found the old remote from years ago, the one Derek had grabbed that night. I held it for a moment, then set it back down. Objects lose their power when you stop assigning meaning to them. As autumn settled in, I replaced the curtains with heavier ones, cooked more often, and filled the freezer with meals I actually liked. The house was warm, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Everything in it served me now. Lena stopped by one evening with a small plant. "For your windowsill," she said. "Something that's yours." I placed it in the sunlight and watered it. Growth, I thought, doesn't need permission. It needs room. That night, I sat in my armchair, music playing softly, and realized something simple. I wasn't rebuilding a life. I was returning to one I'd paused. And this time, I wasn't giving it away. Weeks passed, and the house settled into a rhythm that felt alive but unthreatened. I woke each morning without tension, brewed my coffee, and listened to the quiet hum of life unfolding in a home that was finally mine. The air smelled faintly of peach from the walls, a reminder that even small choices could reclaim space long lost. Every room carried intention, every piece of furniture positioned not for someone else, but for me. I realized something profound. Peace isn't found in silence. Peace is claiming the right to fill a space however you want without apology. Lena continued to visit, but she was different now. The hesitation in her voice was gone. She entered the house with her own key? No. She entered with her own courage. She shared her struggles with budgeting, with work, with finally standing alone without asking for rescue. I listened, offered advice only when asked. She laughed more freely, carried herself taller. Each time she left, the house felt lighter, not because she was gone, but because she had returned to herself. One morning, I received a letter in the mail. No stamp from Andrew. Not legal. Just Derek. I tore it open casually. Accusations, blaming, thinly veiled threats. He demanded attention, a fight, recognition. I didn't reply. I didn't even read past the first paragraph. Silence had teeth now, and it didn't need sharpening. By the end of the week, there were no more letters, no calls, nothing. He had learned the hard way. The old rules no longer applied. I started noticing subtle shifts in myself too. A sharper sense of what I would tolerate. A refusal to bend for politeness when it meant losing my ground. Grocery shopping, neighborhood walks, even conversations with friends were now measured by clarity, not concession. I was astonished at how much lighter my chest felt. Years of internal compromise had been quietly lifted. I moved like someone finally learning how to occupy space without shrinking. One rainy afternoon, while sipping tea by the window, I glanced at the empty driveway and realized the house wasn't just mine. It was a statement, a message built not from anger, but from endurance, knowledge, and calm authority. Every lock, every deed, every careful phone call had culminated here. Not revenge, not spectacle, ownership of space, of voice, of life. The following week, I invited Lena over for dinner. Not a lecture, not a rescue, just food and conversation. She arrived early, hands empty, eyes relaxed. We cooked together, laughed at minor disasters, and for the first time in years, the kitchen felt like a home instead of a battlefield. She thanked me quietly, not for intervention, but for showing her how to stand. That gratitude hit differently than I expected. It wasn't about being appreciated, it was about knowing she had learned the value of her own voice. Later that night, I sat in the green velvet armchair, journal in hand. I wrote about boundaries, silence, and the difference between tolerance and submission. Each word etched a lesson I would never forget. No one should have the power to erase you in your own home. No one should dictate your voice. And sometimes, the strongest form of love is saying no and meaning it. A soft knock came at the door. Lena's plant, the one she had placed months ago in the sunlight, had grown taller. I touched its leaves and realized growth. Like life, only thrives when space is respected. That night, I slept knowing that no intruder, no loud voice, no entitlement would disturb the calm I had painstakingly reclaimed. The house was mine, the air was mine, the voice, finally, entirely mine. By the 10th week, the transformation felt complete, not just in the house, but in me. I walked through the rooms each morning like a woman reacquainted with her own life. Light fell through the windows in the exact angle I preferred. The furniture was positioned for comfort, not for someone else's convenience. The house breathed with me now, steady, calm, unthreatened. I realized something I hadn't understood before. Claiming your space doesn't require confrontation. It requires consistency, clarity, and the courage to let the world adjust. Lena had moved fully into her own apartment by now. She called less frequently, but when she did, it was about her life, not about the chaos she'd left behind. She was learning independence, and I felt an unfamiliar but powerful pride. No lectures, no interventions. Just the quiet knowledge that I had given her the blueprint to stand without leaning on me, or anyone else, improperly. One afternoon, I went through the house with a notebook in hand. I made small adjustments, replaced worn towels, cleaned out drawers, reorganized the pantry. Every choice felt deliberate. Every object returned a little autonomy to my life. Derek and Lena's absence had created a vacuum that I now filled with purpose, not resentment. For the first time in years, the home wasn't just mine legally. It belonged to me emotionally. Then came the call I had anticipated but never hoped for. Derek. He was angry, pleading, confused, threatening. He wanted to know if there was any way back. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Silence had become a weapon and a shield, and I wielded it effortlessly. Within hours, his calls stopped. Frantic texts followed, but I never read them. The moment I realized the noise had no power over me, the final weight of years of manipulation lifted. Neighbors started noticing the difference, too. A soft knock at the door from Mrs. Kelly down the street. "Your house seems peaceful now," she said. I nodded, smiled faintly. Peace doesn't always need to be announced. Sometimes it just exists, and those paying attention will notice. I spent that evening reflecting on what had changed. Not just the house, but the lessons I had silently taught. Ownership isn't just legal. It's emotional. Boundaries aren't just rules. They're statements. Power isn't loud. It's steady. And respect, true respect, comes only when people understand that it cannot be taken without consent. Later, Lena stopped by with a small notebook of her own. "I've been writing," she said. She didn't ask for advice. She didn't ask for validation. She just shared. I read a few lines, smiled quietly, and said nothing else. Watching her take ownership of her own thoughts, her own voice, made the work I had done feel complete. Not because she owed me, but because she learned what it meant to stand alone. As night fell, I sat in my armchair, journal on my lap, house quiet except for the soft hum of life returning. I poured myself tea, warmed my hands, and looked around. Every detail, the curtains, the plant on the sill, the worn spots on the rug, told the story of reclamation. Not revenge, not drama. Calm authority, resilience, patience. And finally, freedom. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll do more than maintain. I'll thrive.
The following morning felt like the first day of the rest of my life. I woke early, sunlight spilling across the peach walls, and drank my coffee in silence, not as a routine, but as a declaration. Each sip was deliberate, each breath measured. The house no longer carried tension, it carried intention. Every room, every object, every corner reflected a life fully reclaimed. I realized then that peace isn't something you stumble into, it's something you cultivate every single day. Lena called mid-morning. She wanted advice on a minor work dispute, and I listened. Not lecturing, not judging, just guiding when asked. The difference was subtle but profound. She no longer came to me expecting a savior. She came seeking clarity, and that alone told me everything about how far we had both come. She laughed softly at something unrelated, and I caught myself smiling the same way. A laugh unburdened, free. Later, I walked through the house and paused in each room. I adjusted a vase, straightened a frame, folded a blanket. These were small acts, but they mattered because they were mine. I had learned over decades that control isn't always loud. Sometimes control is the quiet assurance that nothing in your life can move without your permission. Derek in the chaos of the past had taught me that lesson painfully, but the payoff was immeasurable. Afternoon sunlight fell through the windows, and I sat with my journal, reflecting. I wrote about lessons learned. Boundaries are sacred, silence can be powerful, respect cannot be demanded, only upheld through consistency. I noted the strange satisfaction of finally understanding that being firm does not make you cruel. It makes you whole. And in that wholeness, I discovered a calm I had never known before. That evening, I opened the door for a neighbor who had stopped by to drop off baked goods. I accepted them graciously, shared a cup of tea, and we talked like adults, not as women bound by duty, but as equals enjoying presence. It struck me that much of my life had been spent negotiating respect where it wasn't offered. Now, simply by existing in my space fully, I earned it naturally. Later, Lena visited one final time that week. She brought the plant I had given her back when she first started to reclaim her life. It had grown tall, strong, leaves reaching toward the sunlight like a small green testament to growth and independence. She smiled at it and then at me without words. I understood. We didn't need dialogue. The quiet conveyed everything: resilience, trust, and the kind of understanding that comes only from experience. As she left, I walked through the house slowly, pausing in the family room, touching the green velvet armchair lightly. It wasn't just furniture anymore. It was a symbol of every choice I had made, every boundary I had enforced, every voice I had finally refused to silence. I sat sipping tea and felt a rare, steady kind of joy. The kind that arrives not with fireworks, but with the satisfaction of knowing you finally own yourself and your space fully. That night, as I prepared for bed, I realized that the house was more than a home. It was a fortress of clarity, patience, and strength. And in that realization, I slept without fear, without tension, without compromise, fully, completely, and entirely at peace.
The final days of that chapter were quiet, steady, and profoundly satisfying. The house had fully returned to me, not just legally, but emotionally. I woke each morning to sunlight spilling over the peach walls, coffee in hand, and no expectation other than living deliberately. The family room, once a battleground of entitlement and noise, now hummed with calm. Every object, every corner, every choice reflected a life reclaimed, not out of revenge, but out of clarity and quiet authority. Lena called that morning, her voice calm and confident. She was handling her new apartment, paying her bills on time, even decorating her small space to feel like her own. I smiled, knowing that what I had done wasn't about control. It was about showing her how to stand firmly in her own life. Independence isn't given, I told her. It's claimed, and she was claiming it beautifully. I walked through the house, pausing in each room. I adjusted the curtains slightly, moved a picture frame so it was exactly where I wanted, and straightened the rug. Small, deliberate choices. I realized that reclaiming your space isn't about the big, dramatic moments. It's about the quiet, consistent acts that say, "This is mine, and I decide how it lives." Evenings became a time for reflection rather than stress. I brewed tea, opened my journal, and wrote down the lessons of the past months. Boundaries must be enforced, silence can be powerful, respect is earned, and your voice is the only one that matters when no one else will stand for you. I let each word sink in, knowing they were not just notes. They were a roadmap to the rest of my life. And then came the final satisfying piece. I locked the front door behind me for the first time with the full knowledge that no entitlement could breach it. I walked to the garden, touched the plant Lena had brought, and felt the slow, steady pulse of life reclaiming itself. The house wasn't just a home. It was proof that resilience, patience, and courage always have their reward. If you've ever felt silenced, walked on, or taken for granted, remember this. Your boundaries are your power. Your voice is your strength. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply to say no, and mean it. Before I end, I want to remind you, if this story inspired you, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and resilience. Hit the notification bell too, so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world. Because reclaiming your life isn't just a story, it can be your reality too.